Hey y'all, it's Miss Welch. This video is going to discuss a pretty in-depth topic of metabolism, which is cellular respiration. So we're going to talk about the basics of what ATP and ADP are, some important molecules in the process, as well as the steps of cellular respiration, which are glycolysis, the transition phase, Krebs cycle, or you may see it also called citric acid cycle, as well as the electron transport chain. So let's get started. Let's start by looking at ATP and its basic structure. Now, ATP is actually considered a nucleic acid as its group of organic molecules. And so we can look at its full name and you can get a pretty good idea of what is inside. So the ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate. So triphosphate, obviously, 3 phosphate groups. Here you see them, PO4, 3 of those. And then adenosine is an adenine plus a sugar. So we have the adenine nucleotide as well as, or nitrogenous base, and then ribose, a sugar. So put those together, we have ATP. Now ADP down here is ATP that has had a phosphate removed. So it's only 2 phosphates. That's where the di comes in for ADP, adenosine diphosphate. Now, we use ATP and ADP in a cycle to help us use energy and release energy when we need to inside the body. You'll sometimes hear these being called the currency of the cell. ATP is the energy currency of our cells, and it can be exchanged, right? Just like money can be exchanged. Either you work for money and earn it, or you buy something and so you have to give money, and so it can be exchanged for energy, just like money might be exchanged for goods. So let's look at how that works. ATP has a high energy bond here at the last phosphate group. So the bond between the last 2 phosphates has a lot of stored energy. If we break that bond and take a phosphate off, then that is a catabolic reaction, right? So catabolism is if you break something. I remember that because my granny had a cat that was so destructive and he would break everything. He even broke his own leg. He fell off the mantle. What cat falls and doesn't land on its feet? But this cat was destructive. So catabolism, catabolic reactions break things. But that break also releases energy. So think about a Kit Kat. There's a cat. When you break it, right, then, oh, there's happiness. So catabolic reactions break apart, but they release energy. So energy is released in that reaction, but we then create ADP. Well, in the body, we wouldn't want to waste that ADP, but we have anabolic reactions that can store energy. So if you have some extra energy left laying around, right, then you can store it by putting the energy back into ADP to turn it back into ATP. So saving it for later. You can add the phosphate back, right, turn it back into ATP, and that's an anabolic reaction. So we are building something with anabolism, and if you build something, it's going to take work, it's going to take energy. So this is a reaction that requires energy input, but then that energy is stored right in that high energy bond of ATP, and you can break it again and release it when you need it. So the body goes through this cycle around and around and around of storing or using the energy that we get through food. So we can think about this like money. I think that is a good way for us to remember the concept. ATP is like a wallet holding your energy or holding your money. So this would be an ATP molecule, right? It's full of energy. It's got some cash inside. But if we spend it, right, we crack it open and release some money, then we have released that energy and it's gone, right? We've got rid of it like that phosphate group that is removed. Then your wallet looks more like this, right? Which is what mine usually looks like. It's empty. It doesn't have as much energy or money. This would be like ADP. The wallet is empty. The energy is less. And however, if you work hard and you get some more energy, right, you can put money back in the wallet and then you can use it again. So we can turn it back and forth, back into ATP and back around again when we spend stuff. This is another way the body can be thrifty with its creation of new molecules. We wouldn't want to get rid of ADP just because it's empty, right? The wallet's empty, but you don't throw it away. You just go get more money. So the body does the same thing. It doesn't make more ATP from scratch. It just has to pop that phosphate back onto a used ADP to get back into the loop. And so that's much more energy effective than trying to create whole molecules from scratch all the time. Okay, so let's get started talking about cellular respiration and why we're talking about ATP. If ATP is the energy currency of our cell, then we need to make a bunch of it. We need to have it available, right? We need that quick cash so we can do all the things we need to do in the body. So instead of our body needing, like, pizza to run the heart and burritos to run your lungs, ATP is the common currency. It's like changing all your money into dollar bills, or if you're going to be in America, or changing them to pesos or euros or whatever, so that you have the currency of the location you're in. We all use the same type of money. It makes it easy. So there are 4 steps to cellular respiration that start with you getting in food and converting all that into ATP, so that then the ATP can be used in your body. That way, no matter whether you eat carbohydrates or lipids or proteins, they can all be converted into the same currency, ATP, and be used throughout your cells. So we're going to go through each of these steps. Now, a lot of books, a lot of websites will show only 3 steps. The transition step is not always clearly laid out as a separate step. So you may see that information, but the process might just kind of skip over that very quickly and not really call it a separate step. But for our purposes, we're going to say there are 4 steps. If someplace said 3 steps, the transition is the one, or transformation, that will be the one they're leaving out, okay? So let's start with glycolysis. It's just like what it sounds, glycolysis. We're going to take glucose and we're going to split it, or lyse, that means split. So you can see here you have a glucose molecule, and you're going to split it basically in half into 2 pyruvate molecules. Now this makes this look very simplified. It's actually not. It's actually 6, 8, 10 different enzymatic reactions to get this one thing done. So you can see all levels of difficulty with this process depending on how in-depth you'd like to learn. This is the level that we probably need just for a basic biology or anatomy class. So step 1, look at your starting and ending products for all of these. That's a good way to go through the different steps. So start with glucose, end with pyruvate molecules, location in the cytoplasm. So this is just happening out and about around in your cells, just everywhere in the cytoplasm. These enzymes can come in and break your glucose apart as soon as it is brought into a cell. All right, and now what do we make besides pyruvate? We want some ATP. You actually make 2 ATP net gain in this process. So you make 4 actually per glucose molecule, but the process has to be kick-started with a little energy, so you use up 2 in the process, so a net gain of 2 ATP. That's really all we're caring about, is how much ATP we can make in this process, but you may see that difference in number depending on how a book or website is describing the process, whether it's the total or the net gain. All right, so after you've made this pyruvate molecule, right, it has to be the next step then. Anytime you have a series of reactions, the end product for one has to be the start product of the next step, right? So the next step is going to start with this pyruvate molecule, and this simplifies it just to show one, but obviously the same thing would happen with both of them. And you're going to transform pyruvate into acetyl-CoA. So a pyruvate molecule by coenzyme A is actually the enzyme that helps do this. Coenzyme A helps turn it into acetyl-CoA. You actually release a little carbon dioxide here. So this is the first place where we see carbon dioxide as a byproduct, as a waste product in this process. You knew that. You knew that eating your food and metabolizing it helped you make carbohydrate waste. And this is where that first happens. Now this happens, this says mitochondrial matrix, but it's actually kind of as we're going into the mitochondria. I think about this like a go into a fancy restaurant, you show up without a suit and tie on, and they're like, oh no, you can't go in. You're not dressed properly. You got to be doctored up a little bit before you can enter the door. I've never been to one of those restaurants, but you know, I hear about it. So that's what this makes me think of. The cell has said, nope, you've been in the cytoplasm. You have to dress up a little bit before we can allow you go into the mitochondria. And that's the transformation step. So start with pyruvate, use coenzyme A to turn it into the product acetyl-CoA, and we release a byproduct of carbon dioxide. Now, no ATP is made in this step. It's just a little transformation, which is one reason it gets left out a lot of times when people talk about the process. Now we are definitely fully in the mitochondria for Krebs cycle. You'll also see this called the citric acid cycle because that is the first molecule that this acetyl-CoA is turned into in the steps. And so sometimes that is used as the descriptive title for this step as well. But basically, the acetyl-CoA, right, that we had from the step before moves into the mitochondria, into the matrix, kind of the jelly maze-like part in the middle here. And through a series of reactions, we make that citric acid, and then we do a bunch of reactions to it and make it again. It just keeps going in a circle. But along that way, we are making some byproducts that we can use in the last step, and we'll get to that here in a second. We do release some CO2. We make 2 ATP. So not very much again, but we make a little bit. It makes me think about paying bills. We're talking about money and currency. This would be like you pay the bills, right? You pay the bills on the first of the month and you pay your next bills and whatever. When you get back to the next month, oh my goodness, we start all over again. So those never-ending cycle of coming back around to the same thing. We remake the molecules over and over again. But if you look down here, follow this yellow line, okay? It's showing electrons. And so we make something called electron carriers. Now for cellular respiration, those electron carriers are NADH, is probably the most common one, or FADH2. Those have really long chemical names that we're not going to worry about, nicotinamide, blah, blah, blah. Just remember by the letters, NADH. And these are electron carriers. Basically, as you're doing this, you're kind of spitting off some leftovers, spitting off some leftover electrons. And those carriers grab them up and hold on to them and take them to the next step. So, acetyl-CoA goes through a bunch of crazy reactions, releases CO2 waste, makes 2 ATP, and creates electron carriers. Now, in the last step, the electron transport chain or oxidative phosphorylation, you may see either of those titles for it. We are now in the inner membranes of the mitochondria. There's actually a bunch of enzymes lined up in the membranes. And these electron carriers bring the electrons to an enzyme, and they do reactions, and they send it to the next one, and they send it to the next one, they send it to the next one. And each time, those electrons jump down their energy levels, and it releases enough energy to make ATP. Now, again, this is a super complicated process, but that's the bare bones basic level of it. We make a whole bunch of ATP here. You may see several different variations in that number. 32 is probably the number I see thrown around the most, but it all depends on enzymatic activity and the type of cell, and a lot of things involved there, but 32 is a good estimate for you to remember of how much ATP is made. So much more. We only make 2 in glycolysis and 2 in Krebs. Now we make 32. So if we get here, we really get a lot of energy from this. The very last electron acceptor, so all those jumping electrons have to go somewhere. The very last acceptor is oxygen. So oxygen is the final electron acceptor, and because it has extra electrons, then that makes it more negative, so it needs some positive, so it will bind with hydrogen and make water. So you'll also make water in this step. You need oxygen. That makes it aerobic. It's the only step that has to have oxygen to work, and it will release water as a byproduct. So we make about 38 ATP total through this whole process if you added it all up together. Phew. Well, those are the 4 main steps. Make sure you go back and look again at starting products, ending products, how much ATP, and where each of those steps took place. Thanks for watching.